Okay, class. So now we have reached toward the end of this chapter. And for today, we would be talking about the type of the respiration that can happen within the living organisms. Our idea of the respiration was that whenever within the mitochondria, the glucose would combine with the oxygen gas to produce carbon dioxide, water, and energy in the form of ATP. So this is respiration, but this is not the case that respiration happens in the presence of oxygen, but there are some scenarios where the respiration can proceed on without the presence of oxygen and would allow us to release more of the energy. So if I were to broadly categorize these types of the respiration, so it falls into the category of being aerobic respiration and anaerobic respiration. The aerobic respiration would happen in the presence of the oxygen gas, and whenever the word anaerobic is coming, so this means that the respiration is happening, but in the absence of the oxygen gas, we say. For this anaerobic respiration that we have, so we have got further two subtypes of this to be discussed. Among the two subtypes that we have got among this, so one would be the alcoholic fermentation. This is one type of the anaerobic respiration, and the second would be the lactic acid fermentation. Both are anaerobic. Why they have got different names? Because they happen within different organisms. So if I were to take a fungus and that fungus is a unicellular yeast with me, so if I would take the oxygen out of it and I would allow it to respire anaerobically, so it would be the alcoholic fermentation. And likewise, we human beings, when we are doing a vigorous kind of an exercise, so in my body, the anaerobic respiration, which would proceed at that time, so this is the lactic acid fermentation, and this lactic acid fermentation, it would take place in the muscle of the animals. Now, if I were to quickly take you toward what alcoholic fermentation actually is, how come the word and the chemical equation would look like, and where in our daily life we can take the advantage of this alcoholic fermentation. So you see that if I were to take a beaker and in that beaker if I would take the glucose solution and I would add the yeast into it, and if I would close up this beaker with the help of a wooden cork, so you see that we have eliminated the oxygen gas from the yeast. Now since yeast is a living organism, it would again respire, but this respiration would be the anaerobic respiration. So by words, what you know is that this yeast, when it is allowed to respire anaerobically, so it would also act on the glucose, and the glucose would not be converted into the carbon dioxide, water, and energy, but rather than it would convert it into the ethanol and the carbon dioxide gas, we say. Again, some amount of the energy would also be released. So if I were to take you into the word equation, so here we have the glucose with us, and this is being converted into the carbon dioxide and ethanol. For the word equation, this here lies the formula of the glucose, which is C6H12 and O6, and this is being converted into 2 moles or molecules of the carbon dioxide gas, and here what we have got is the ethanol with us, and this carbon dioxide and the ethanol that we are producing by the alcoholic fermentation in the yeast, they have their advantages. So when we try to talk about the commercial use of alcoholic fermentation, so this carbon dioxide is basically used in not the brewing, but rather than we say that it would be utilized in the baking industry. And why we use this CO2 in the baking industry is to be raising the dough, and by that we would be making bread out of it. The situation would be that I would prepare the dough and then I would add the yeast into it and then I would take it into a chamber where there would be no presence of the oxygen gas. So the time the yeast is respiring anaerobically, so the O2 bubbles they would trap within the dough and they would raise it. Later, when we bake the bread up in the oven, so that would kill the yeast and also the ethanol that would accumulate in the bread, so that would also evaporate. On the other way around, in the brewing industry where we are required to be making the wine, so over there the CO2 is not utilized, but rather than this ethanol is utilized, and this ethanol would be making the wines that would be sold in the market for, you could say, for the clubs, where the people they are habitual of drinking this wine when they would do party. Now, moving onward, here we have got this anaerobic respiration that we have to discuss in the muscle tissue. So, here we have to see two situations. The first situation would be that when we are normally sitting and we are not doing any of the vigorous activity or we are not doing any of the vigorous work, and something would happen differently when we are exercising. You see that when I am sitting normally, to my mitochondria, our blood capillaries would be supplying enough of the oxygen gas and enough of the glucose, so my cells they would entirely be respiring aerobically, and they would release much of the energy that would be able to fulfill the energy requirements or the needs of my body. On the other way around, when we talk about it, what happens during the exercise, so you see that when we are exercising, so you see that my muscle cells they would be doing a lot of muscular contractions, and for a lot of muscular contractions we need to now increase amount of the glucose and oxygen gas that we are required to be taking it to the muscular tissues that we have got. But the slight problem is that when we have started the exercise, so my heart rate and the breathing rate, they would not increase instantly, but they would take some time. So that time when the heart and the breathing rate, when they are trying to be reaching their maximum rate so that they can be providing sufficient of the glucose and more of the oxygen gas to the muscle tissues. So during that time, my muscle tissues, along with the aerobic respiration, they would do the anaerobic respiration, and in doing so, we would be depositing the lactic acid. And this lactic acid, you see that this is toxic, and we are required to be removing it after we have stopped the exercise. So here you have to learn the word is, and that word is the oxygen debt. What we mean by the oxygen debt is that the time when my heart and the breathing rate, when they were going to their maximum rate so that they can deliver sufficient of the O2 and the glucose. So during that time, when my muscle would be taking place, would be taking the anaerobic respiration along with the aerobic respiration. So that time it would be the oxygen debt because we have created some kind of a debt on the body in terms of the oxygen. And during that, the glucose that we have got, it would be converted into the lactic acid. Now, since the word is lactic acid, and this lactic acid has a problem because this would lower the pH of the blood. And at the same time, this can also denature the enzymes within my cell. So this actually suggests is that when we stop exercising, so again, despite the fact that we have stopped the vigorous activity, I would keep on breathing more of the oxygen gas. And that reason is because my body, after it has stopped exercising, so this has to remove the lactic acid, and the lactic acid cannot be removed from the body until or unless I combine it with the oxygen gas. So the question is that how come we be returning this oxygen debt? So the answer is very simple that we have stopped the exercise, and you may have realized in your daily life that when you stop the exercise, so your heart rate and the breathing rate they would remain high for some period of time, despite the fact that that we are not no more exercising. So we must know that what would be the use of this extra oxygen that we are inhaling post exercise. So this says that this extra oxygen would be used to break down this lactic acid. Now you see that I have got these muscle tissues, and surrounding them we have the blood capillaries, and in the muscle tissues the lactic acid concentration is higher, and in the surrounding blood capillaries the lactic acid would be lower. So post exercise this lactic acid would diffuse out of the muscle tissues and it would come into the blood plasma. And from that blood plasma, this lactic acid now it would be brought to the liver of my body, and in the liver, two things would happen to this lactic acid. And one thing would be that this lactic acid would be used in the aerobic respiration. And my body also have an ability where this would convert the lactic acid into a complex sugar, and that is the glycogen with us. So this is how we are repaying the oxygen that actually was created at the start of the exercise, where my heart rate and the breathing rate they were taking some time to reach their maximum rate. But this is not only the situation that the use of the extra oxygen gas would also be that we would be reoxygenating the hemoglobin, and post exercise my internal organs they are yet working at a higher metabolic rate, so I have to be making sure that for the maintenance of that high metabolic rate I am again required to be supplying more of the oxygen gas than the usual. So this is why post exercise, we keep on inhaling more of the oxygen gas. So now the last situation is that what mechanism or the metabolism would be initiated in my body that would lead to an enhanced breathing rate. Okay, class. So you see that the time we exercise, so since my rate of the respiration is increasing, so that means that I am supposed to be increasing the breathing rate. And the situation is that how come this breathing rate has increased? So here you see that I have got these cells, and when during the exercise they would respire more, so they would be releasing more of the carbon dioxide gas into the blood plasma. Now, since the carbon dioxide would make the blood pH acidic, so the pH of the blood would be lowered, and this lowering of the blood pH is something that would be detected by the specialized receptor that I have got in the medulla oblongata of the brain, and when they are stimulated, so these chemoreceptors in the brain now they would send the electrical impulses to the intercostal muscles that I have in between the ribs, and they would also cause the diaphragm to be contracting, and in that way, we would be increasing the depth of the breathing, and that would fulfill the extra need of the oxygen gas that my body cells or the muscle tissues that would be requiring at that time. So if you so now the mechanism that I have told you in the diagram, so let us just try to have a look on toward its description that when the rate of the respiration increases in the muscle tissues during the exercise, so more of the CO2 would be produced and it would be released or diffused into the surrounding blood plasma. Since this blood plasma would be going to the brain as well, and in the brain we have got this medulla oblongata. And in the medulla oblongata we have the chemoreceptors. So these chemoreceptors, since they are very sensitive to the chemical change and very sensitive to a decrease in pH which the CO2 has brought about by, so now they would carry the electrical impulses to the diaphragm and the intercostal muscles, and by that, when they are stimulated, so our rate and the depth of the breathing would increase. And that means now I have started to provide more of the oxygen gas to the muscle tissues by having an increased inspiration. So more volume of the air would move into my body, and more of this would be delivered to the cells now. So I hope you would be clear with this types of the anaerobic respirations that we have in the yeast and the muscle tissues.